Good morning. Like Jared said, while we do hold to the complementarian view in our church, we do recognize the powerful role of women and how they play a role in the lives of the church and our families. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my testimony with you today on Mother's Day. I am going to probably be looking at this for a lot of the time because if I start wandering, we're going to be here all day. So bear with me. I do want to preface what I'm about to say. I want to be clear that women are not to exercise spiritual authority over men in the church, and I'm sharing my testimony with you while weaving in the story of two other women from the Bible to highlight how my story relates to Scripture. I'm not coming here today with the goal of teaching, but instead my desire is to exhort and to encourage and to share the story of three of God's daughters, Hagar, the Samaritan woman, and myself. My prayer is that through these glimpses into our lives, each shaped by pain, redemption, and divine encounter, that you will see the heart of God who meets us right where we are. The testimony video you saw this morning was just a small part of my journey. I know it was long. I even shortened it. But I wanted to give you a window into my heart and why I respond the way that I do, why I do what I do, why I walk this walk of faith daily. So often we make assumptions about people without really knowing who they are or what they've lived through. We expect others to fit into familiar molds, but God never intended us to be carbon copies of one another. If he wanted sameness, he would have created robots. But he handcrafted each and every one of you, each and every one of us, with a unique story, a unique perspective, and a unique purpose. So before diving deeper into my personal testimony, I want to share a broader context so that you could see the heart behind the woman standing here before you today. This is the first time I've publicly shared my testimony. I've shared bits and pieces with some of you along the way, but we would love to walk or to hear your testimony as well, like Jared said. So whether it's on a Sunday morning or Wednesday, feel free to let us know. Everyone has a story to tell. And what you've seen and heard today only scratches the surface, like he said. There are parts of my story that I hold close. These are wounds and chapters that not everyone is ready to receive with compassion and care. Some of you do know the deeper places that I've walked. You've walked with me through those in love. And I've learned that vulnerability is both scary and sacred. Not everyone knows how to hold it well, and that's okay. But it takes wisdom, and that wisdom teaches us that when and with whom to entrust those deeper things. So while I share a lot of what I've been through, there are still even harder, deeper, and darker things that are unseen, maybe by you, but never by God. He sees everything. He has walked with me through every single valley and has proven himself faithful time and time again. So as you probably gathered, my journey has not been easy. I'm a woman marked by grace and scars. I carry baggage, some that's heavy, some I'm still working through, but all that has been redeemed by God. I have been burdened by some things lately that I've been going through, some spiritual battles as a family. And I want to gently exhort you guys to remember before you hear my testimony that there will be people that walk through this door. There are people sitting here today that might have deeper scars than me, might have a darker past than me. And we are to meet them with love, grace, compassion, empathy, forgiveness. So I want to exhort you to be gentle, not to hold them in contempt or judgment as they share their story, but to be gentle with them. As Ephesians 4:32 reminds us, be kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. And if you hear nothing else today, I hope you hear this. God is love. He is a healer. He is compassionate. He is redemptive, and he meets you right where you are. So if you'll turn to me to Genesis chapter 16, we're going to start by reading there. And while you're turning, I will catch you up on what's going on here. We're going to read a little glimpse about the story of Hagar, but there are two people in her story that we need to know first, Abraham and Sarah, or Abram and Sarai at this point. So backing up just a little bit for context, in Genesis 12, God sees Abram and calls him to leave his comfort zone and home for a promised land that Abram cannot and won't see and with his own eyes. So through the covenant that he makes with Abram, God promises to bless him and to make him a father of many nations, as we see in Genesis 12, 2-3. That might not be up there. Abram believes God and has great faith, But God doesn't fulfill this promise immediately, and this causes Abram and Sarai to begin to doubt and to look for other ways to fulfill God's promises to them in their own strength and in their own timing. Though Abram's journey is full of struggles and at times doubt, God's promises remain steadfast and true, not because of who we are, but because of who he is. And that's when we meet Hagar, an Egyptian servant girl who feels invisible, rejected, alone in a wilderness. And it's here, in her deepest moments of despair, that she encounters El Roi, the God who sees. In this pivotal moment, Hagar recognizes that God has not forgotten her. Even though she was cast aside and abused by others, God still sees her. And she names God, "You are the God who sees me," in Genesis 16:13, showing that God's eyes are always upon us, especially in our most vulnerable moments. Now we'll pick up in Genesis 16, verse 1. Abram's wife, Sarai, had not borne any children for him, but she owned an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, "Since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave. Perhaps through her I can build a family." And Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and gave her to her husband, Abram as a wife for him. This happened after Abram had lived in the land of Canaan 10 years, and he slept with Hagar, and she became pregnant. And when she saw that she was pregnant, her mistress became contemptible to her. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for my suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and when she saw that she was pregnant, I became contemptible to her. May the Lord judge between me and you." Abram replied to Sarai, "Here, your slave is in your power. Do whatever you want with her." And then Sarai mistreated her so much that she ran away from her. And the angel of the Lord found her by a spring, or a well, in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" And she replied, "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her authority." The angel of the Lord said to her, "I will greatly multiply your offspring, and they too will be too many to count." The angel of the Lord said to her, You have conceived and will have a son, and you will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your cry of affliction. This man will be like a wild donkey. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. He will settle near all his relatives." So she named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are El Roi." For she said, "In this place have I actually seen the one who sees me." And that is why the well is called Bir Lahai Roi. It's between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar gave birth to Abram's son, and Abram named him his son whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. All right, so we're going to be going on a spiritual journey, if you will, today, and we're going to have a few stops to make. Our first stop here is the well of redemption. That's up there. Sorry. All right, it's chapter 16 here deals with infertility, infidelity, abuse, and abandonment. And I'm sure most of you have probably struggled through at least one or some or all of these things in your lifetime. The story of Hagar deals with a very real, very raw, very relatable scenarios. I know I can relate to most of these things personally, and I think that's why her story cuts so deeply for me. Hagar is used, cast out, pregnant, and alone. And now, before you hold a pitchfork to Abram and Sarai, you should know that the context in that time and location, giving a concubine slave to a husband by a barren wife is attested elsewhere in ancient Near East for remedying childlessness. So while it definitely wasn't what God had in mind, Abram and Sarai probably borrowed from ancient Near East practices, thinking that was how God wanted them to proceed. The root of much of what Hagar is dealing with, though, comes not from her own doing, but from Sarai and Abram's impatience as they wait on the promises of God. We often find that when our desires cause us to pursue a path different from the direction of God's design, the alternate direction that we take in our impatience often leads to destruction and pain. My testimony is filled with these moments where I took alternate paths, pursuing my own desires for my own purposes, resulting in pain. And sometimes people of God try to pursue the promises of God apart from the plan of God, which often leads to pain. But healing happens when we experience the presence of God through the provision and the providence of God, just like Hagar at the well. And we'll come back to that a little later. But back to Hagar. In her despair, God meets her, not with judgment, but with a name and a promise. It's a very interesting scenario. We see that Hagar names God. It's the only time in the Old Testament where anyone, not a male or female, names God. But Hagar says, "You are El Roy, the God who sees me." This is the very first well, the well of redemption. And that the well of being seen by a loving God who does not look away from us, even in our rebellion, running, and our recklessness. Like Hagar, I lived most of my childhood as an outcast, unseen, unloved, alone, and scared. And when I was 2 years old, my parents got a divorce. While I didn't understand the extent of how that would affect me until later in life, I was left alone, feeling overlooked, while my parents and my grandparents fought for custody of me and my sister. We were taken from my mom at a young age, lived with my dad, and as you saw, his life turned upside down, turning ours upside down. He fell to the disease and the sin of drug abuse, and that eventually led him into a criminal career of drug dealing. Also, he became a prostitution ringleader and a thief. It is something when you see your dad's face flashed across the screen on the news that he is wanted when you're at daycare. My dad lost custody of me and my sister, and we were still not allowed to live with my mom, so we ended up with my grandma. Most of my young childhood was spent being tossed back and forth between family members. I lived with almost every family member, aunts, uncles, great aunts, grandparents, just whoever could take us. There was really no stability other than when I lived with my grandma for a short period. I felt alone, abandoned, and unseen most of my life. In the midst of the instability and trauma and loneliness, though, God met me. My grandmothers made sure that I was involved in church, and every summer I would go to my safe haven, Camp Manitani, a big church camp in Reading, PA, that we would travel 5 hours to get to. My summers would be spent there as a camper or a volunteer, and then between showing horses, going back and forth. It's, I think, how God helped me to get through anxiety and depression and all of those things. He kept me busy. But this was my well, the place like Hagar, where I ran to get away from the pain and suffering of my life, and the Lord met me there. When I was 13 years old, I made a decision to give my life to Jesus. I was baptized at Camp Manitani by my spiritual older brother, Scott, who had a major impact on me at the time. I knew then I wanted God to be the center of my life and that my life was to be surrendered to him completely, but my life was filled with confusion. But Jesus was the one that held me safe and secure. My life verse was Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. I clung through this, through every cop siren, every fist that flew, the pain, the confusion, and the doubt. And even today, God is using this verse in my life. He used Piff the other day to send me that verse randomly. She asked him what she could send me to comfort me and encourage me, and that's what she gave him. And I just knew that was God speaking through her, because this has been the verse that has gotten me through. My childhood was filled with chaos. I've seen both of my parents get arrested in front of me. Through tears and confusion, I begged police officers not to take my mommy away. I've been in courtrooms since I was a child. I faced death and danger because my parents made dangerous decisions in life. My dad would take me and my sister on drug deals and hide us under blankets in the back seat of his car. Other dealers would threaten not only my dad's life, but mine and my sister's as well. My mother was abused by her boyfriend for years on end. I've seen her almost killed in front of me when he smashed her face in with a brick, shattering every bone in her face. My mom would find herself in multiple situations of domestic violence, and her life was in jeopardy many times, even as an adult, as me being an adult. Not knowing if your mom's going to be murdered or if you would get another call from the coroner, like I did with my dad, was a really hard reality that I've had to face my whole life. But by the grace of God, she is still here, and she is on a better path now. God protected us through it all, and even when I didn't fully know his love for me, like Hagar, he saw me, even when I didn't understand love, because it was something I wasn't taught or shown. He loved me, just like he loves you. And I like what C.S. Lewis says. He says he loved us not because we were lovable, but because he is love. This was my well of revelation, where I was seen by a loving God who never looked away from me, even when the pain I carried wasn't caused by my own choices, but by the consequences of others' actions. Sorry, I've been doing a lot of crying. I think this is yours, Jared. Oh well. Okay, now in verse 8, we see something beautiful that really spoke to me, especially considering the circumstances that we're in today with Caden's injury. It has been very hard. It might not seem like a big deal to you, but he is my only child. We have never navigated something like this before. And I have medical anxiety over things. So this has been a hard journey to watch your child in pain and not know and not have answers. So it's been pretty hard. So this spoke to me. The angel of the Lord asking Hagar, where have you come from and where are you going? This may spark in your minds Genesis 3:9 after the fall, when Adam and Eve sin and cover their sin by their own strength, hiding from God. In Genesis 6:9, so the Lord God called out to man and he said to them, where are you? Or maybe you remember the prophet Elijah when God says in 1 Kings 19:9, after Elijah runs away from God, God says, what are you doing here, Elijah? But I hope that it'll remind you of Psalm 139, 7 through 10. Where can I go to escape your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there. If I fly on the wings of the dawn and settle on the western horizon, even there, your hand will lead me. Your right hand will hold on to me. Here, David beautifully articulates the omnipresence of God, highlighting that there is nowhere we can go to escape God's touch or his gaze. Imagine a child playing hide and seek, thinking that they're concealed in a dark corner. The parent, however, knows exactly where they are and is ready to embrace them. I used to do this with Caden all the time. We would play hide and seek, and all I had to do to find him was make him laugh or say, I'm right here. That's what kids do. Just like that, God, as a loving parent, knows exactly where his children are, what's going on in their life. We cannot hide from him. We cannot run from him. He is always right there, seeking us out with his loving presence. And I'm so thankful that he took the time to seek out little old Emily, an orphan child, lost, abandoned, alone, and afraid. He pursued me. He picked me up out of the ashes, and he called me his own. Now, that leads me to the second well, the well of restoration. And if you'll turn to Genesis 21, we're going to look at find Hagar at another well. Starting in verse 1, the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called his name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. So even through their doubt and disobedience and disbelief, God still delivered on his promises because of who he is, not because of what we have done. It reminds me of Psalm 109:21. I don't think that's in there, Jared. But you, Lord, my Lord, deal kindly with me for your name's sake, because your faithful love is good. Rescue me. Back to Genesis 21, picking up in verse 8. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the boy, and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named, and I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now, depending on how long they would breastfeed at that time, Ishmael was 16 to 19 years old here. He was still called a child, though, by both God and his mother. Mothers know that their babies will always be their babies, no matter how old they are. We never stop being a mom. But here we also see that God's promise to Hagar is still intact. It hasn't changed. God still makes Ishmael father to many nations, just like his brother Isaac, because he is an offspring of Abraham. But it is not through Ishmael that the original promise is fulfilled. That will be through Isaac. So God affirms Sarah's decision to send them away. And once again, Hagar finds herself in the wilderness, alone, lost, confused, and abandoned. And picking up in verse 15 through 20, when the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes, and then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, let me look not on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite to him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." And then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up, and he lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. Here we see that Hagar has nothing. She runs out of water, she's in a desert, and she places her child under a bush. She weeps, not wanting to watch her son as he's dying of starvation and dehydration. She begins to cry, but this time God hears not just Hagar's cry, he hears the cry of the boy. Ironically, in the last well, the boy's mother names God El Roi, the God who sees. But Ishmael's name means God has heard. And this is the very thing that we see right here in this passage. God has heard Ishmael's cries, and he responds. He tells Hagar to fear not, something we see 365 times in the scriptures. Hagar is facing death. This is a life or death situation, and now she has a son to care for and worry about who is dying before her. But God not only just sees her, he hears her and her child, and he responds. Genesis 21:19, then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. This is the second well on our journey, and it's not just about being seen. It's about being heard, saved, provided for, and redeemed. Like Hagar, I was a young mom. I had Caden at just 16. I had run into the arms of a man desperate for love, but instead found more addiction, pain, and dysfunction. After enduring physical abuse and mental abuse from my family while I was 7 months pregnant and CPS got involved, I spent time in foster care with Caden. Imagine a 16-year-old girl with a 3-day-old baby driving away from the hospital in the backseat of a stranger's car. My dad would eventually get custody of me again, but the cycles of dysfunction continued to repeat. He left us for drugs on the run, abandoning me and my child once again, and my grandmother had to step in and take custody of me until I was 18. After that, I moved in with Caden's dad, and I spent several years trying to build a family, the family I always longed for. Eventually, he would start battling addiction and depression, but once again, I found myself and my child in danger, and a cycle that was not easily broken. A situation I promised that I would never put myself through, but there I was. But here I am, repeating cycles of dysfunction again. To give you a clearer picture of what I was dealing with from that time, I was about 18 or 19 years old, and if you've ever lived with an addict or know an addict, you know that the ups and downs are pretty scary and unpredictable. And usually for him, it was when he was high, he was calm. So it wasn't as dangerous for us because he would just sit there. But when he didn't have a fix, that's when things would get scary and out of control. All of our belongings were sold for drug money. My bank account was emptied multiple times. We had no money for bills. He would get violent if I did not give him my money. There was a lot of emotional and mental abuse and infidelity. I watched him try to take his own life multiple times. He would cut himself so deeply in front of me that it would be like 2 inches deep. Sometimes you could see like bone. And he would throw things at the walls, break doors, cabinets in anger. And to be clear, everything I share with you, Caden does already know, so this isn't a surprise to him. But there was even a time when he ran into the house, loaded a gun, put it to his head, and went to pull the trigger while I was holding Caden in my arms, standing right beside him. The amount of emotional and mental pain that we went through was unimaginable at times. I'll even tell you that there were times where he was using fentanyl patches, and he left one on the counter. They were clear at the time, and I couldn't see them, but Caden did somehow. He was only a few years old, and he climbed up on the counter, he took the fentanyl patch, and he stuck it to himself. And I put him in the car seat that day, and I found it on his hoodie. Praise the Lord for his protection over our children. It did not affect him that day. Just like Hagar, just like Ishmael, God's protection and provision for his children always prevails. This relationship, along with being separated from God, led me to have extreme anxiety. After I got pregnant, I thought God was mad at me, so I fled. I knew getting pregnant out of wedlock was a sin. I knew sex before marriage was a sin, but nobody ever taught me that God loved me and his grace and forgiveness could reach even to little teenage Emily. So like Hagar, like Adam and Eve, I ran and I hid, trying to cover my sin by ignoring it and ignoring God, which only led to deeper pain. Over the next few years, I would suffer through extreme anxiety and depression. It was so bad that I would have 16 panic attacks a day. I thought that I was dying just about from everything. So that I would lay under the blankets in the dark and I was just cry and have anxiety nonstop. It was crippling. I wouldn't leave my house for days. The fear of death, crying myself to sleep. I felt exhausted, alone, abandoned, and afraid. But one night, I was sleeping. I woke up in a full panic attack. This is something that happened often. I was sweating, unable to breathe. It felt like there was an elephant on my chest. And if you've had panic attacks, you know what that feels like. Tears were falling from my eyes. And I just remember saying, God, I need you. And instantly, it all went away. I felt complete peace. It was as if he had been sitting at the edge of my bed all of those years, just waiting for me to cry out and remember him. I went to bed that night knowing that I had to recommit my life to the Lord, to get back on track. The next day I asked for a Bible, and the rest is history. The closer I began to walk with the Lord and draw close to him, the further away from the world and the worldly connections I became. This was ultimately left me severing my relationship with Caden's dad. And I want to just say that it was an instant change. We go from death to life, and a new spirit is put into us, but the sanctification process takes time. It is not something that is done instantly. I'm still working on things from my past. My old habits do not go away that quickly. God has to weed those things out little by little, and he's still working to this day. I stumbled my way through life wanting to please God, but also having no spiritual direction or community to help guide me. I read my Bible, I prayed, I watched sermons on TV, Joyce Meyer and Stephen Furtick, and I'm not endorsing them, but I want you to realize that God can use imperfect people, imperfect preachers to deliver his people and to show that, just to show you how far I've come through these years. And I eventually found a church where I would spend several years. It took me about 7 years to make connections there, or at least feel like I was connected in that church. I was shy, afraid, backwards, and quiet because I had no idea what a real relationship looked like. And the only safe relationships that I had were Caden and God. Eventually, I would get married, like I said in the video. I thought that I was supposed to marry because I needed somebody to help me support Caden, to be a spiritual leader, provider in our home. And this man presented himself as a Christian and a godly man. And we were going through marital counseling, before premarital counseling. It was very clear that we did not align on pretty much anything. Actually, our counselors would look at us like we were crazy. They knew that we were not meant to get married, and they tried warning us. But I was stubborn and hard-headed and thought that I knew what was best. So I got married anyway. Right before we were supposed to leave for our destination wedding was when I was diagnosed with pre-cervical cancer. Because the wedding was so close, the doctor told me that I would be fine to go to the wedding. Once I came back, we could deal with everything. But when I came back, it had already progressed to stage 1 cancer. I was about 27, 26 at the time I was diagnosed, and I was sitting in the doctor's office alone. I was there by myself, and I remember when the doctor said, "I'm so sorry," I just said what came to my spirit: God's got this. I decided in that moment to be silent and took a posture of praise. I went home, turned on Hillsong, Let the Devil Know Not Today, and I just worshiped and cried to that song. The rest is somewhat of a blur. If you've ever been diagnosed with cancer or a life-threatening disease or know somebody that has, you know that it goes really quickly. Testing after testing, pricks, needles, scans, surgery. It was very intense, very scary, but through it all, I held on to Jesus. I found strength I didn't know that I had in him. I saw his provision through my family, my church, and through people who prayed for me, carried me, and walked with me through the valley. And I think I said, but in the video said, I am 7 years cancer-free by the grace of God. And when they did one of those scans, though, they did find pre-thyroid cancer as well. So that had to be taken care of. I had 2 life-saving operations back to back, one taking my cervix, one taking half of my thyroid. But in the midst of all of that, I was also diagnosed with stage 4 endometriosis. And my doctor took my tubes that were damaged from the scarring during my cancer surgery. So that disease left my body damaged and infertile. I still have it today. I still struggle with the pain of it today. They compare it to a heart attack, and that's what women with endometriosis, especially stage 4, especially the harder parts of it, have to go through monthly. For as long as I can remember, though, I believed that God was calling me to be a mother to many. Imagine how devastating it was to know that I no longer was going to be able to fulfill that calling. So when that door seemed closed, I wrestled deeply with grief, confusion, and loss. But in time, I began to see how even my disobedience became a place for God to display his mercy. He allowed me to carry and deliver a healthy baby boy, a miracle that I will never take for granted. Romans 8:28, so fitting that you have that hoodie on today, really comes alive for me. And we know that all things work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Jared and I know that one day, if we want to grow our family more, we will have to adopt as a part of this journey. And the truth used to hurt deeply. It's something that I wrestled with for a long time, but God has opened my eyes to the well that surrounds me. I am a mother, not just in a title, but in a calling. I am a mother of a remarkable child, Caden, whose life fills mine with great joy and makes me proud. God gave me the sacred privilege of loving him, raising him, and even experiencing natural childbirth before my body began to break down. Being a mother is the most honorable and rewarding calling that I have ever had the privilege of experiencing, and I'm sure that every mother in this room would agree with me. I wouldn't trade it for the world. In fact, I've walked away from many things to ensure that I was pouring into my child as God had called me to do. And I also see now that I've been called to be a spiritual mother to others, then to nurture, disciple, and to pour into the lives of those who God has graciously put in my path. God redeemed what I once thought was lost. He had a plan all along, a purpose woven through every heartache and every trial. We serve a good and a powerful and a mighty God. Just like Hagar at the well, God saw me. He spared Caden's life and mine. He heard our cries and he met our pain. And when I was blinded by sorrow, he opened my eyes to see the well that was right in front of me, the well of living water, the well of restoration, which brings me to our third and final well. One more turn to John 4. That's in the New Testament, just in case you need help. All right, here we're going to meet the Samaritan woman who meets Jesus unexpectedly at another well. Starting in verse 4, he had to travel through Samaria, so he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the property that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, worn out from his journey, sat down at the well. It was about noon. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. "Give me a drink," Jesus said to her, because his disciples had gone into town to buy food. "How is it that you, a Jew, ask me for a drink, a Samaritan woman?" she asked him. "For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." And Jesus answered, "If you knew the gift of God and who is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would ask him and he would give you living water." "Sir," said the woman, "you don't even have a bucket and the well is deep. So where do you get this living water? You aren't greater than our father Jacob, are you? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, and as did his sons and livestock." And Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks of this well will thirst again, but whoever drinks from the water that I give him will never thirst again. In fact, the water I will give him will become a well of water springing up in him for eternal life." "Sir," the woman said to him, "give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and come here to draw water." "Go, call your husband," he told her, "and come back here." "I don't have a husband," she answered. "You have said correctly, I don't have a husband," Jesus said, "for you have had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The Samaritan woman came to the well alone at noon. This was unusual. Women back then typically would draw water from the well early in the morning when it was cooler and there was a time for socialization and connection. We all know how much women love to do that. But she came in the heat of the day at noon, likely to avoid everyone else because of her shame and her isolation. After multiple failed marriages and a damaged reputation, she was likely ridiculed and cast out by her community. But Jesus didn't avoid her. He pursued her. He met her right where she was, offering her living water, not judgment, but transformation. Still, it's important to see that her sin was the barrier between her and that living water. And we must remember the weight of our sin isn't just about what we have done and the crime we have committed, but it's about the one who we have sinned against. Jesus later tells her to go and sin no more. So that's a very important part of that. So if there's one part of my story that I try to avoid, or I used to avoid talking about, it was my divorce, like this woman. That's why I can so deeply relate to the Samaritan woman. As a Christian, I carried so much shame around it. It felt like I was wearing a big scarlet A, and still sometimes to this day, it feels like that. And I still continue to feel the weight of judgment when I tell other people that I am a divorced and remarried Christian. I truly tried to make it work. I married believing I was doing the right thing, honoring God and others, but it ended up in deep devastation, leaving me broken, confused, and feeling disqualified. The first marriage became another hard valley of my life that God used to teach and shape me. I believe God tried to save me from that pain, but I stubbornly, like I said, ran ahead of God, trying to make it happen in my own time, just like Abram and Sarai did with Hagar. Remember how I said we would come back to that? Sometimes people of God try to pursue the promises of God apart from the plan of God, which often leads to pain. But healing happens when we experience the presence of God through the provision and the providence of God, just like Hagar, just like the Samaritan woman at the well. My story is no different. I desperately wanted to be loved, provided for, and protected, but I was looking for these things in a relationship, in a man, not in God. I essentially abandoned God and his conviction, calling to pursue whatever I wanted in the moment. I knew the relationship wasn't good for us. I even had another Christian brother tell me, Emily, I don't think that this is a good idea. And I said, I know. And I proceeded to run into the fire. I learned quickly how hard it would be to try to do things in my own strength, in my own way, and by my own accord. It became a nightmare. For 2 years, there was nothing but bitterness, fighting, and anger. This man would insist that I would choose him over my son, getting upset with me when I would spend time with Caden after he came home from work, telling me that my time with Caden was to be spent when he wasn't there, and as soon as he got back, all of my attention needed to be fixed on him. There was a lot of mental and emotional abuse. Things got physical on several occasions. On 2 accounts, he threw books and a box at my head because I did not respond the way that he wanted me to. I think he thought he was doing the right thing and viewed me as a rebellious wife needing to be tamed, but he didn't realize how deeply he was hurting me and Caden, and not just him, but his entire family. And if you were here on a Wednesday, Caden shared his testimony about some of that as well. There were other things going on that I was unaware of, and because of all of this, Caden soon became suicidal and depressed. But he wasn't alone. I too was suffering through suicidal ideation at that point, and I had really never thought about taking my life before that. But I remember I would watch out the window thinking there is only one way that this marriage ends: death. Either I will die or he will die, but that is the only way out, because that was all that I was taught from my church family. I didn't know how. I would imagine those things in my head, and I knew that that was not something that was healthy, and it was not from God. So to everyone else, he was the nicest man in the world, but it was all fake, a show that was put on for the world to look like a nice Christian man and husband, and make me look like I was crazy. And eventually my church family would catch on to what was going on, and I had people reaching out to help me finally. They never endorsed divorce, but they did say that a separation was needed and necessary. I left once, moved in with my mom for a few weeks, and he acted really nice and convincing, so I came back, but nothing changed. It actually got worse. We tried marriage counseling, but it's hard to go through counseling when one or both are not willing to change. Eventually, I made the decision to leave for our own safety and well-being. Caden and I moved in with my mom a second time for a while, and then I came here to Ashtabula. And out of the vulnerability and transparency, I will tell you that Jared and I did not do things the right way either. I deserve the scarlet letter A on my chest. I am guilty. But once again, Jesus met me in my mess. He didn't meet me at the altar. He didn't meet me in the spotlight. He met me in the darkest places, at a well I didn't even realize I was standing beside. Just like the woman in John 4, he didn't turn away. He looked at me and he said, I see you and I know your story, and I'm inviting you to drink. He gave me living water. He didn't just save me, he restored me, he rescued me, and he redeemed me. He gave me purpose again. He gave me community in all of you. He gave me love that heals through my amazing husband and my son. And I just shared with Jared how thankful I am yesterday that God has used my relationship with him and Caden to teach me how good God is as a father and as a husband to me. And I'm so thankful for these relationships. He's taught me so much through my family. And I testify that I am blessed beyond measure, standing in front of you today full of hope, no longer a slave to to who I once was, but now a daughter of the Most High King. Through every scar that was left on my body and on my heart, he redeemed every one of them. And I can tell you that I have an endless amount of testimonies, more than I've shared with you today, of God's faithfulness and his goodness in my life. Not just the ones I shared with you, like I said. In these trials, these moments of pain and suffering and the unknown are actually the very thing that God used to sanctify me, to draw me closer to him, and to reveal to me that he is always faithful. This isn't the last well that I'll sit at. In fact, we're sitting at one right now. And this isn't the last well that any of you will sit at either. This is the beauty about being a child of God. Our story is written by the author of life. He uses every moment, the good and the bad, to weave into the fabric of our redemption story, all so that we will know that he is good and he is faithful. The thread through each of these wells is this: that he is the God who sees, the God who hears, the God who knows, and the God who answers. He meets us at the well of revelation, restoration, and redemption. Sometimes he shows up when we're on the run. Sometimes when we collapse and we can't take another step. Other times when we're hiding in our shame and our brokenness, or maybe when we're being told that we aren't enough, and when we can't keep doing the things we don't, or we keep doing the things we don't want to do and we can't break free. But he is always El Roy, the God who sees. And just like the Israelites, just like Hagar's story didn't end in the wilderness, neither does yours. God is still writing your story. Maybe you're in the room and you're just hoping to be seen. Maybe you've come today with nothing left to give. Maybe you feel ashamed of your sin and are hiding from God or your church family, trying to avoid the possibility of judgment and shame. Maybe you need to share your testimony. Maybe you feel overlooked and misunderstood and defeated, but I invite you to look up, because God is here. He sees, he hears, he knows, and he answers. And he will open your eyes to see that he's already provided for your needs. He's been with you all along, just as he was with Hagar in the desert and the Samaritan woman at the well, and with me in the depths of my own brokenness. He is the God who sees you, and his healing love is waiting for you at the well of living water. So like Jesus, I extend the invitation today to come. Come and drink from the well of living water and thirst no more. Amen.